world just witnessed a very strange and perhaps the most embarrassing incident that has ever occurred in the Oval Office. By now, Donald Trump's intentions about the war in Ukraine and American foreign policy course regarding it have become quite clear. Trump wants to end this war, and he does not care if it ends on Putin's terms. Sometimes it is difficult to predict Donald Trump, but as of February 28, 2025, it seems beyond a reasonable doubt that the United States is abandoning Ukraine. What does it mean for the future of the war and Ukraine? Let's try to unpack this chaotic month of February. Welcome to another update on the war in Ukraine, which has been going on for over 3 years. Every week we release 3 new exclusive videos for our members and patrons. The Pacific War, the Eastern Front of World War II Prelude, and many other series, including the War of Spanish Succession, Punic Wars, Iberian Reconquista, Russian Revolution and Civil War, North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, and much more. It has been long overdue, but we have finally created a YouTube channel exclusively for our Kings and Generals podcasts. Please go and check out Kings and Generals podcast, home to the Pacific War Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, link in the description and pinned comment. To see those, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job. Normally we start out our Ukraine updates with a description of the developments on the battlefield, but this time the chaotic diplomatic activity carried out by Donald Trump was the main source of news. Remember, on the campaign trail, Trump promised to end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of being sworn into office. Of course, he failed to deliver on that overly optimistic promise, but to be fair to him, he immediately made ending the war in Ukraine one of his top priorities. The question is, on whose terms is it ending? In early February, both the United States and Russia confirmed the intensification of contact between the sides. Simultaneously, on February 3rd, Trump stated that he wanted some of Ukraine's resources, particularly rare earth minerals, in exchange for continued support. He said, "We're telling Ukraine that they have very valuable rare earths. We're looking to do a deal with Ukraine where they're going to secure what we're giving them with their rare earths and other things." Earlier, when Zelensky was presenting Ukraine's victory plan, the joint investment and extraction of Ukraine's natural resources, including uranium, titanium, lithium, graphite, and other strategically valuable resources, was one of the main provisions. Basically, Ukraine's president was offering his allies, who at this point were privately and publicly complaining about the so-called Ukraine fatigue, an unspecified stake in some of the country's natural resources in exchange for continued military support and security guarantees. It is reported that Zelensky personally discussed this idea with Trump during their meeting in September 2024. In his interview with Reuters on February 7th, Zelensky responded positively to Trump's remark, calling on him to do a deal in exchange for security guarantees. The Americans helped the most, and therefore the Americans should earn the most, and they should have this priority, and they will. All looked reasonable and predictable at this point, but suddenly, in his interview with Fox News, Trump's rhetoric changed. He essentially demanded resources in exchange not for future military aid, but for what the United States had given Kyiv by that point. "I want to have our money secured, because we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars. They may make a deal, they may not make a deal. They may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday." The US president also suggested $500 billion that Ukraine had to repay. This number had absolutely no basis, it was invented out of thin air. The Kiel Institute for World Economy estimates that the United States has spent $119 billion for direct military and civilian aid to Ukraine. The Pentagon figures are higher, at $182 billion, but a significant portion of it has been allocated to the US military training in Europe and replenishment of the Americans' military stocks, which may explain the difference between these two figures. In any case, it is by no means $500 billion or $350 billion, which Trump suggested a few days later, without explaining where the $150 billion went. But the situation truly escalated on February 12th, when the new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, publicly stated that Ukraine should forget about NATO membership and a return to the pre-2014 borders, along with American troops being deployed to Ukraine after the ceasefire. He added that security guarantees to Kyiv should be given by Europeans. Then Trump had a very long call with Putin. On the surface, everything looked ordinary, as the sides reiterated their intention to stop the war and improve bilateral relations, along with stating that their negotiation teams would meet immediately. To put things into perspective, there was nothing new here. The Americans have long been reluctant to back Ukraine's membership to NATO, while Trump and his allies have long advocated ending American involvement in Ukraine as soon as possible. The worrying point is that Trump has given up on all of these potential tools of leverage even before the negotiations with the Russians had started. These developments sent shockwaves in Ukraine and European capitals. Bloomberg cited unnamed European leaders saying, "Trump's call to Putin means he is selling Ukraine." Then Zelensky met with the US Treasury Secretary Besant, who presented the Ukrainian president with a rare earth mineral agreement that the Trump administration wanted to sign. Besant reportedly demanded Zelensky immediately sign the agreement, which would have given 50% of ownership over unspecified Ukrainian resources without providing security guarantees to Ukraine. The Ukrainian media reported about Zelensky's angry reaction being heard from behind closed doors. Zelensky refused to sign this deal, along with then publicly and categorically refusing the possibility of paying back the American aid provided before, since it was given as a grant, not a loan. This in turn made Trump angry, who accused Zelensky of being asleep and not meeting with Besant, even though they clearly met. He went on to implicitly say that involving Zelensky in any deal with Putin was unnecessary, since the Ukrainian president had 3 years to make this deal. He then called Zelensky a modestly successful comedian, a dictator without elections, with an approval rate of 4%. Meanwhile, Trump only had nice things to say about Putin. On February 18th, the United States Secretary of State Rubio and the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov met in Saudi Arabia. During the meeting, Lavrov rejected the American proposal for Russia and Ukraine to mutually refrain from striking each other's energy facilities, blatantly denying that Russia has ever targeted civilian objects, while later adding that Russia categorically opposes the deployment of European troops in Ukraine in any shape or role. At the same time, the Russians reiterated that the recognition of Russian control over all of the annexed territories, including areas controlled by Ukraine, such as major cities like Zaporizhia and Kherson, remains non-negotiable for them. On February 23rd, a member of Trump's negotiation team with Russia, Steve Witkoff, said that the Istanbul negotiations of March 2022, which demanded territorial concessions, a neutral status, and a very small army from Ukraine, hence rejected by Kyiv, could serve as guideposts for future negotiations. To make matters worse, the United States voted together with Russia against the European-initiated UN resolution condemning Russia's invasion and supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity on the 3rd anniversary of the Russian invasion on February 24th. Meanwhile, Putin offered Trump a deal on the extraction of Russian rare earth materials. This in turn raised eyebrows in parts of the Russian nationalist pro-war community. Aren't we supposed to be fighting NATO and the West to kick them out of sacred Russian lands? And now we are inviting them in. At the same time, Kyiv losing the United States as a key military supporter would have been a massive and potentially decisive blow. Therefore, despite all the statements of Trump and some of his aides, the Ukrainian government was looking for ways to maintain healthy relations with the US. The Ukrainians and Americans were working to make their rare earth mineral agreement more reasonable and acceptable for both sides, while Trump started talking about a more modest sum of tens of billions, which the United States now wanted back. Even though at the time this video is uploaded, this deal may well be absolutely irrelevant, it is worth noting that it does not have any concrete provisions about the money the United States is going to get. The only concrete provision is Ukraine obliging to contribute 50% of all profits from future earnings from joint enterprises into the Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund, jointly owned by both countries. This deal also includes a vague allusion to security guarantees, stating the United States' support to efforts to obtain security guarantees needed to establish lasting peace. All in all, this deal looks like a preliminary memorandum to keep the conversation going, since the finalized deal would need way more details and ratification by the Ukrainian parliament. Trump has already stated that the presence of American workers implementing this deal would be an automatic security for Ukraine, while also reversing his statements about Zelensky. When answering a journalist's question whether Trump still considered Ukraine's president a dictator, Trump said, "Did I say that?" before praising Zelensky and calling him the best president of Ukraine. Trump also pledged to continue delivering military aid to Ukraine until the sides find a diplomatic resolution to the war. But on February 28th, the tables turned once again. Zelensky traveled to the United States to meet Trump, where they were expected to sign the deal. But then the world witnessed a truly remarkable and shocking scene in the Oval Office. Trump and his Vice President Vance had a very vocal spat with Zelensky, and then tag-teamed to accuse him of not being thankful for the American support, not wanting to make a deal, and being keen on World War III. Not a single time did Trump accuse Putin of something nearly as bad. Many believe that this was a premeditated attempt by the American leadership to humiliate Zelensky in front of the world, destroy his credibility, and force him to sign a ceasefire deal on Trump's terms, or Putin's terms. So where does this leave us? As of late February, the whole thing looks like the peak imperialism of the 19th century, with two great powers bullying a smaller country into submission. One thing is clear, Trump wants the war to end as quickly as possible. If Ukraine suffers in the process and is forced to accept very unfavorable terms, then so be it. At the same time, he wants to get whatever it's possible to get from Ukraine to maintain his reputation as a winner and master dealmaker in America, all the while pushing the matter of security in Ukraine onto the Europeans. At this point, it looks like the Trump administration will stop supporting Ukraine if a considerable pro-Ukrainian group in the Republican Party does not suddenly force Trump to rethink. It looks like Ukraine is on its own together with Europe. Meanwhile, Trump, his vice president Vance, and tech supporter Musk are doing everything to alienate Europe. Back in his first term, Trump also pushed America's NATO allies to increase defense spending, but this time things may go to a whole new level. If Trump goes forward with his threats, he may even leave NATO. That would make Europe utterly unprepared in the face of a far from perfect but experienced Russian army backed by its wartime economy and production, while enjoying Iranian, North Korean, and potentially Chinese support. Europeans are finally realizing the necessity to enhance their military and security potential, and to assert its strategic independence as a unified force. Following Hegseth's statements, foreign ministers of Ukraine, France, UK, Spain, Italy, Poland, Germany, and the EU gathered to express their continued support to Ukraine, while also demanding Europe's participation in future negotiations. The next probable Chancellor of Germany, Merz, who used to be a staunch Atlanticist, stated that the Americans in this administration do not care much about the fate of Europe, while calling to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible so that we achieve independence from the US. Following the meeting between Trump and Zelensky, several European leaders publicly expressed their support to Ukraine. Denmark, Britain, and several others have decided to increase their defense spending. There are rumblings about the necessity to build a European army to oppose potential threats in the absence of American protection. The likely loss of the American aid has pushed the Europeans to step up once again, just like they did when the US Congress was stalling the military aid to Ukraine. In February, France announced the delivery of Mirage 2005F fighters. Britain pledged 50 armored vehicles and tanks by spring 2025. Germany promised to send 100 Iris-T air defense missiles, along with delivering 6,000 AI-equipped drones. Furthermore, the Netherlands, Bulgaria, Canada, and Latvia both donated dozens of armored vehicles, while Czechia announced that it completed the delivery of 1.6 million artillery shells to Ukraine, which would cover Kyiv's needs until April 2025. Finally, on the third anniversary of the Russian invasion, Sweden announced the supply of Trident Mk2 air defense systems and RBS man-portable air defense systems. Estonia pledged 10,000 artillery shells. Britain promised military aid worth £4.5 billion. Spain promised military aid worth €1 billion to be delivered within an unspecified period of time, while the EU will deliver financial aid of €3.5 billion. Furthermore, France, Britain, Germany, and some other European countries have stated their readiness to send their troops into Ukraine as peacekeepers once the peace deal is signed, even though Russia does not want to see any Western troops in Ukraine ever. And the potential number of the peacekeeping force floated in the media is too small, at some 7,000 to 8,000 troops. Too small to serve as a real deterrent to Russia if they decide to attack again. Still, Europe has been trying to act as an independent force, which will continue backing Ukraine even if the United States abandons it. But will it be enough? The loss of the American aid may pose unsolvable questions to Ukraine. Ever since it has become apparent that Trump was siding with Putin, Zelensky has been looking for avenues to expand the pro-Ukraine coalition. Zelensky visited Turkey when the United States and Russia were meeting in Saudi Arabia to get Erdogan to publicly reiterate Turkey's support to Ukraine's territorial integrity and NATO membership. Turkey also later stated that it's willing to send its troops as peacekeepers to Ukraine. But in the absence of American military aid, support from all other allies may be insufficient to effectively oppose the Russians. Because, make no mistake, Russia and Putin continue demanding Ukraine's capitulation, Zelensky's removal, and if things work out well for them, the removal of American troops from Eastern and Central European NATO states. Putin is impervious to high losses suffered by the Russian army in Ukraine, and believes that he can outweight Ukraine and its allies in the war of attrition. and if America ends its involvement in Ukraine, stops sending military aid, and removes its diplomatic support, this may well happen sooner or later. February 2025 was the highest point of the war for Putin, certainly on the political front of things. But it is not like Russia is massively successful on the battlefield. They are not. In most portions of the front, a bloody stalemate persists, while on others, the Russian army continues its slow and grinding advance. The Ukrainians have largely stabilized the situation in the Pokrovsk sector, after in January the 15th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade captured Koslina and a portion of the TO-406 highway, one of the supply lines to Pokrovsk. The Ukrainians have been counterattacking here in February and have liberated the majority of Koslina. They have also liberated Pishchana, potentially creating a problematic situation for the flanks of this axis of the Russian advance. But west of Kurkova, the Russian army conducted a notable mechanized push to capture Dachna and most of Alekli on February 17th. In the Velika Novosilka sector, the 60th Motor Rifle Brigade gained further ground to the north, capturing Novoocheretovata and most of Beletska and Novosilka. On February 7th, Russia declared the capture of Toretsk, the battle for which started more than 7 months ago. But towards the end of the month, the Ukrainians retook a significant portion of this town after a series of successful counterattacks. On the Kupiansk front, the Russians have expanded their bridgehead in Dvorichna and Novomelinsk, while also gaining another foothold west of the river Oskil in Topoli. This is a problematic situation, as the expansion of the bridgehead here may potentially force Ukraine to lose a significant territory east of Oskil, which they liberated in 2022. On the Kursk front, the back and forth continued. On February 6th, the Ukrainian army conducted a successful counterattack east of Sudzha, capturing Kolmykov and Cherkesskaya Konopelka. The purpose here is to push the Russians away from Sudzha, the biggest town captured by Ukraine in the Kursk Oblast. But the situation on the western flank of the Ukrainian Kursk salient has become much more problematic after the capture of Sverdlikovo. The situation on the Kursk front remains fluid. But all of that may become meaningless if Ukraine does not have the weapons to fight. We may be truly entering a decisive stage of the war. Will Europe have enough to compensate for America abandoning its ally at its time of highest need? Will the Ukrainian people surprise the whole world once again by finding a way to stand up to the Russian aggressors, despite even harsher odds now? We may find the answers to these questions pretty quick. But one thing is extremely clear now: countries will think many times before believing the United States of America to be a trustworthy ally. Further updates on the war in Ukraine are on the way. If you don't want to miss them, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 exclusive videos, join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.